So, welcome to the Community Rewilding webinar, the first in a series of 3. Today, we are going to talk about how to rewild like a wolf. Dead excited about talking about that with you guys. We have sessions coming up in the next few weeks about how to rewild like a beaver and also like a wild boar. So if you haven't signed up to those, please do. But first of all, we're going to talk about wolves. So what are we going to go through today? So in the next kind of 55 minutes, this is our kind of plan and our agenda. So we're going to talk about, first of all, what is this series actually about? We're going to talk about 3 projects which we've kind of created help guides for. So we're going to talk about, kind of talk you through our kind of planning process for those 3 projects. The first is dogs distributing seeds like wolves. The second is the idea of a wolf kill or a carcass and the circle of life, how we might present that to the public. And the third one is about reimagining dogs as wolves to revive our nature reserves, which is more of a conceptual piece at the moment. And between each of those, we're going to have hopefully a quick Q&A session so that we can kind of get your involvement and your feedback on these ideas. So that is the plan. So what is this series all about? So as Helen and I mentioned, for the last 2 years, we've been working on a small urban nature reserve in Lewes, which is in East Sussex, about 10 miles east of Brighton. And we've been kind of trialing some kind of what we call community rewilding concepts, really, where we take the actions of some ecosystem engineers that we don't have in the landscape, and we work with people in our local community to try to get them to understand how ecological processes work, how keystone species operate, and also just get them engaged and actively involved in the rewilding process. And as you can see from this picture, we've really been able to engage lots of people, young and old, many different backgrounds, and it's been really fantastic for the reserve. So the kind of background to this, I think, is that we are really, really keen, and it's great that other people are. I think there's a growing community of people who see this fantastic kind of rewilding revolution taking place. It's a wonderful, positive, hopeful movement. But does it involve people enough? Are people central enough to this kind of new, invigorating nature conservation movement? And my feeling is not yet, but it's coming. And to give you an example of that, if you look at the current 50 rewilding projects on Rewilding Britain's website, you'll find that only 8% of them, so 4 of those projects, really talk about community being at the heart of the project. There's lots that talk about connecting with communities, but really, really empowering communities. I would say there are only 4. So well done those 4, some of which may be on the call. So it's Community of Arran Seabed Trust, there's Community Rewilding Allestree Park in Derby, there's Wild Woodbury, and there's Wild Tolworth. Fantastic projects. Go and take a look at those. So that's really great, but really we need more. So how can we kind of move to change this narrative? Well, here's a few things that we've kind of been thinking about. One is we've got to find ways of taking rewilding to the people. We need to work in people's backyards. You know, we need to be operating in urban areas, in schools, with businesses, you know, in small spaces, in parks. We've got to do more of that. I think we've also got to make rewilding and nature more interesting for people. It's got to be fun. It's got to be relatable to their lives and the things that they do. We need to really think about offering people affordable and diverse access opportunities to rewilding sites and rewilding projects. And I think we should start thinking about people as rewilders themselves. You know, it's not just, we are ecosystem engineers, as are wolves and bears and boars. So perhaps we should be looking at that a bit more closely. We could be buying land for communities to rewild, really empowering them, putting at the center of these projects. And I think we need to give communities more decision-making power within these rewilding projects, really a sense of ownership coming from community. So there's some of the things that we need to kind of, as a collective, as a community, be thinking about more, I think. So kind of within that, we hope that some of these initiatives that we're going to talk about today and in the next few weeks offer us opportunities to kind of take those rewilding concepts to the general public in the places that they live, which are often, urban environments far from the wildest nature that we have. So let's talk a little bit about wolves then, to get things kick-started. So the wolf is an ecosystem engineer. It has huge impacts on the ecosystem and on the natural environment that it lives. But unfortunately, in the UK, it's debatable exactly when the last wolf disappeared, but it was probably around 1760, possibly slightly before. Not really that long ago. Sadly, there are currently no plans for its return. I believe we're now the only Western European country for which there has either been no natural recolonization or a human-engineered reintroduction of a major predator since these big extinctions have happened, which is a little bit sad for us. But it's not here at the moment. But we know it diversifies ecosystems through a concept called the ecology of fear, which we'll talk more about later in our Project 3. We know that wolves provide carcasses for other mesopredators and scavengers to utilize. We know that when there are wolves around, there's more fur, more bones resources in the landscape. And we know that wolves, like other large mammals, herbivores, for example, carry seeds in their fur over large distances. So, this is the impact that they have over the wider environment. So we thought it might be really fun to kind of work with local dog walkers and use local dogs to tell the story of the impact that these wolves had on the environment and on the landscape. So our first project is dogs distributing seeds like wolves. Now, the background to this is that we have an area of the Railway Land Nature Reserve, which Helen would describe as overly loved. And you can see from the picture here, it's quite degraded, it's very compacted, there's a lot of use here, a lot of dog walkers, a lot of public access. And we thought this would be a great place to see if we can actually kind of find ways of regenerating the ecosystem. Also, many of you will know that dog walkers, they come in for a lot of criticism, whether it's leaving dog poop bags on the reserve or whether it's, potentially disturbing wildlife. That's a big issue on many nature reserves and many environmental projects. And we wanted to kind of turn that on its head. How could we run a project that really made dog walkers the positive, having the people that we're having and the animals were having a positive impact on our nature reserve, actually helping us to regenerate the nature reserve? Could we really kind of change that story? So we came up with a project last spring called Walking in the Footsteps of Wolves. And the idea of this project, which is not our idea originally, the project came from actually two amazing sisters in Chile, in South America, who unfortunately a large area of their local forest was burnt down due to kind of climate change, forest fire. And they had 3 border collies, and they decided to put backpacks on these border collies to help reseed this completely burnt out area of forest with tree seeds. And we thought that is such a great project, really great project. The BBC covered it on their news site. We thought, what if we took that same concept and replicated it, but used it to talk about how wolves had an impact on the landscape when they were here by spreading seeds. So we ran this project, and these are our kind of step-by-step instruction for kind of how to make it work. So first of all, target areas. Choose degraded or species poor spaces that would benefit from reseeding. The timing of the project for reseeding is best in early spring, so March and April, but September is also a good month to get germination. Choose a site which has a good degree of sunlight. We actually did some coppicing in our area because it was quite dark, scrubbed up, kind of leggy scrub area. Needs to be enough light for germination. Think about soil compaction. That's a big problem on our site. So if the land is very compacted from overuse, then germination is going to be really low. So you could think about replicating wild boar activities of rooting around to kind of, disturb the soil. We'll talk about that more in the coming weeks. and then sort of consider the impacts of the project. So is it appropriate for dogs to be off the leash in this area? Will other wildlife be affected? Do you need signage to communicate why dogs might be off the leash with backpacks at this particular site? So that's the first thing. The second step is about kind of seed selection and preparation. So we chose a local wildflower and grass seed mix, which was a kind of woodland glade or woodland edge mix. And we bought it from a local registered supplier that we trusted. We have to be really careful with this because there are often garden centres and shops that will sell seeds which they call wildflower seeds, but they can include non-native species, and they might not be of local provenance, so they might not germinate as well. So doing the research here on where you're sourcing is really important. Maybe considering even local hay cuts with seeds from a nearby site is another way of cutting down your costs and keeping your seeds of local provenance. So that's the first kind of challenge. Second thing is purchase some sand. This is basically a diluter. So we mix the seed in with the sand in the bucket. Make sure that your sand is really dry. If it isn't, then the sand and the seeds tend to stick inside the backpacks of the dogs, and also the seeds might germinate earlier than you would like to because of the moisture. And then just noting that this technique could also be effective for things that we haven't tried. So, you know, native tree seeds we've talked about, nuts, fruits, fungal spores. Why not? Let's experiment with this concept because it's worked for us really well. The next step is to purchase and adapt the dog backpacks. There are lots of different brands, all sorts of shapes and sizes available online. Just do a Google search on dog backpack and you will find many of them. We recommend buying at least a kind of small, medium and large size of backpack for different size dogs, because if you're asking the general public to bring their dogs, they do really come in all shapes and sizes. So have a think about that. So buy your packs. They're not particularly expensive. And then it's important to choose packs that have 2 pockets, one on each side of the dog's body, as you can see in the illustrations here. Most of them do. And then we used just a sharp pair of scissors to cut holes in the bottom of those pockets. And then we put the sand and the seed in the pockets. And then depending on how quickly you want the sand to come out, how much area you want the dogs to cover, it depends on how big those holes are. So that's quite an important thing to kind of consider and get right. We were working in a really small area, so it didn't actually matter if the dogs drained the seeds quite quickly. The next, maybe most important part of the project is then engaging the community. So reaching out to dog owners. We have a great social media presence at the Railway Land, so we use that very effectively. Obviously, you can use posters. You can use local events to invite participants. And then just giving people really simple instructions so that it's as easy for them as possible. We actually run mini training sessions showing them where the site was and how, you know, just testing the packs on the dogs. You might run the whole thing as an entire event in one day, in which case you can do it, you know, in one session. And this is a fantastic opportunity to reach new audiences that aren't necessarily engaged with nature or wildlife or a nature reserve. So explaining the concept that their dogs are, you know, there's a wolf inside all of our dogs, and that they are kind of, you know, they can help engineer the landscape just as wolves did. We often tell people about, you know, a wolf can cover a maximum of 100 miles in one night, which is an incredible distance. Getting people to think about 100 miles from where they live, that a seed can be moved from here to that location in one night is kind of pretty mind-blowing for people. So yeah, those kind of relatable stories are really fun. And then it's literally running the project. So we actually set up a collection point at the reserve headquarters, so people could come in, they could grab a pack, they can put the seed and the sand in, they can head over to the Rewilding project area, and they can come back all in their own time. We asked them to bring the packs back so that the next dog walker could then pick them up and use them again. You might want to do it a different way, but just thinking about how can we make this as easy as possible. And then just really monitoring progress. So It's easy to track where the dogs have been because the sand is really obvious on the soil, so that's very helpful. Gathering feedback from users to see how the project's working, and also thinking about kind of reducing trampling in those early stages of germination. We used our coppice wood to create kind of natural, what we called islands, but they were effectively barriers. Once the dogs had done the reseeding, that reduced traffic and allowed for germination in those kind of critical early stages. And then, yeah, really, really important, celebrating success, you know, getting that story out to the public, sharing what's happened, you know, sharing videos and footage of dog walkers with their dogs, with permission, of course, highlighting the role of the dogs in supporting rewilding efforts, and then kind of monitoring the regeneration process and sharing images of, you know, plants that are actually emerging and flowers when that time comes, to just kind of show the success of the project. So here's some images of our kind of dogs and dog walkers. In the middle image here, you can see the sand and the seeds just really coming out very quickly from the pack of this particular dog walking along the track there. So it's really obvious, and it's fun for the people involved because they can see the impacts straight away. I guess the element of this project that we weren't expecting, but that was very welcome, was just the sheer public interest in it. So we sent a press release out to a few places in early August of last year, and the whole project went completely viral. We started off with kind of local newspapers, and then went into the kind of national press. We were on breakfast television and national news on all the major TV channels. It then went international. We had people on the reserve saying, "Oh, I like your article in the Washington Post." We were like, how are you even reading the Washington? Why are you reading the Washington Post? And how are we in the Washington Post? It went America, it went to Japan, Australia. It really, really caught people's imagination. And we've estimated at least kind of 20 million people have actually seen this project across the world. And even today, I think it's all over Monty Don's social media today. I see some people nodding their heads. I haven't even looked. But it's incredible how the kind of the publicity has just rolled on and on. And I think this is kind of a real positive sign for all of us, because it's like, if we can be creative and we can involve people, then, you know, the press really love that stuff, a positive story. So we need to look to kind of get more and more of those stories out there. So that is the first project. We have about kind of 5 minutes. Let me stop sharing for just a second. If anybody has any questions about that particular project that you'd like to ask, Helen and I can try and answer them as best we can. I hope it was clear. If there's anything that was unclear, please do ask away. Any questions? Anna.
Hi. I think it's a really interesting project and really great idea. I was just wondering, because, you know, there's a lot of talk about keeping dogs on leads to protect wildlife so they don't disturb them. Is it just because it's kind of like a little bit temporary, that it's not, you know, it's not a regular thing, so it's not going to disturb wildlife too much? Or is there kind of thoughts on that? I don't know.
Helen, I think you're very well positioned to answer that one, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, obviously, I mean, Dogs on the Railway Land, it's a small urban nature reserve, so dogs and dog behaviour here is a massive issue for us. What we found with this project is because it, as Dylan said, it did turn that relationship with dog walkers on its head slightly. You know, we were asking them to help us. It meant that we could have all sorts of conversations with them that were previously quite difficult to have. You know, it just opened the conversation up, really. And we were also able to explain that, yes, we were doing this on a small trial site. You know, it wasn't something that we wanted to happen generally, either on our nature reserve or anywhere else. It was a really carefully controlled trial. But generally, I would say it's been really beneficial in terms of our relationship with the dog walkers on the site. It's slightly sort of de-escalated you know, what can be quite a difficult relationship sometimes.
That's really great to hear. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Any other questions?
Can I just answer, because Joe Carr has put in the chat, are there any improvements you'd make having trialed it for regeneration success? Do you want to, I mean, I've got views on that, Dylan. Do you want to go first?
Oh, no, you go for it, Helen.
I mean, what I would say is, on the one hand, in the first year that we did it, because the soil was so badly compacted, the germination rate was quite low. In fact, in terms of people engagement, they didn't care, you know, they just loved the idea of it so much. But I think it does show that it needs to be part of a broader scheme, you know, so we're also doing the, you know, be a wild boar day and sort of rootling to cause that disturbance to try and improve germination this spring. And so I suppose, you know, you have to take quite a long view of it. You know, it's not a panacea. It's not suddenly going to sort out all of your problems, but it's certainly a very sort of powerful tool, sort of thing, in your toolbox. I don't know if you've got anything to.
No, I haven't. No, well, only that Monty Don had a perspective on this when he came to the railway land, and he said, "Oh, I love this project, but my viewers on Monty Don's Britain's Gardens will definitely phone in or contact us and say that there's too much soil compaction." And my response was, "That is absolutely fine. You know, we are learning about this project, and we're not saying that it is a perfect project." But I said, "Well, what would your solution be?" And he said, "I would definitely get a couple of pigs in here to rootle around for, you know, even just a weekend, and it would make a huge difference." So, you know, in a way, Monty's advocating for a sort of bit of a wild boar, small scale reintroduction there. So I thought that was like a great answer, even from a gardening perspective. It still kind of takes us back to our ecosystem engineers being the most efficient way to improve the ecosystem. So that was nice. We could take, oh, Helen.
Sorry, because Kat has also put a question in the chat box saying, did you find a lot of the seed was distributed in just one area, or was it pretty well spread? I would say it was pretty well spread. I mean, it's not an enormous site by any means. And to be honest, the dog walkers were doing with what they do with their dogs, throwing sticks that the dogs would chase after, you know, so there was actually a degree of us being able to direct where we wanted them to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we did find, I mean, you know, every dog is so different, and some sat with the packs and just didn't move, and their owners were like, "Can you do something?" You know, some threw sticks, some just wandered around, you know, and but it doesn't really matter, because the combination of all those activities are random, really, in a way, and they're certainly more random than a way a human would probably approach it. And that's the whole point, is to try and approach this from nature's perspective. Had time for one more question, if anyone has one. If not, we'll move on. Anything else in the chat, Helen?
Yeah, Catherine has said, Andy and our team have a lovely idea that they would distribute different seed at different locations around the park to make sure the seeds are appropriate to the habitat. So, I mean, that's lovely. That's obviously a much bigger sort of area than we're dealing with.
Yeah, I think that's really, it's a really nice idea, and also might be a way of testing how effective some of these germination, you know, how effective the germination rates are using this methodology for different species. Might be the slightly larger, more aggressive species, for example, do better because it's so random, and they're therefore going to end up competing with other plant species in some of these spaces. But yeah, that's a really good idea. Please send us the results. Okay, in that case, thanks everybody. That's really great. So we'll move on to the next project. Okay, so project number 2 is how to create a circle of life hunting trail, or predator-prey trail. So the concept here is really that of, you know, the fact that we've lost carcasses, dead, particularly large dead herbivore carcasses in our landscape in the UK. And in fact, most large herbivores would be farmed animals, and the government requires dead animals to be taken off the landscape as quickly as possible. So, that's a legal requirement. It's therefore very difficult to see, apart from, a wild deer, for example, see many of these kind of large herbivores in the landscape. We also don't have any large predators. So we've lost that. But explaining to people the value and importance of these carcasses is really critical, because they play such an important role in maintaining healthy ecosystems. Obviously, the predators are controlling herbivores. They're reducing disease rates amongst those herbivores to begin with. But when in our project, we talked about wolves, but in the case of when they've actually left the carcass, then other scavengers come in, such as mesopredators, foxes, or badgers. Wild boar might use carcasses, and then of course lots and lots of insects, hunting beetles and fly larvae. All these things also really require these carcasses. And then finally, the bones and fur that's often the last thing left are such an important element of the environment. As they decompose, calcium and other elements are absorbed into the ground over decades or hundreds of years, and the fur is really important, for example, for nesting birds. So this is really important and quite interesting, I think, to talk about this kind of cycle of life, which is difficult for people in the UK to see often in the wild. So bearing this in mind, we thought it would be fun to create a kind of circle of life walking trail for people to kind of experience what it would be like to sort of come across a wolf kill. So we'll talk through the kind of instructions for how we did that. So the first thing was planning the trail, choosing a location, a place that's kind of safe, an accessible area with minimum disturbance to wildlife, because we're going to encourage people to walk the trail. And then sort of thinking about what's the storyline, what that we want to tell, where our concept was that walkers would follow some wolf footprints, which would then merge with some deer tracks coming from another direction, and that would lead them to a skeleton site. So they would kind of almost be able to see the kind of track the hunt as it happened. We saw some materials, so we saw some ethically sourced bones. In this case, it was a local roe deer kill that I buried in my back garden for 12 months until it was clean. And we got some wool as well, some natural wool. We need to be careful that there are no chemicals on these things. And we used some wire mesh, and we just posted those on some nearby trees as a sort of way of replicating the kind of fur element. So we created these fur feeders, basically, which we could not believe how quickly the birds emptied them. It was as if we put bird feeders up on the tree. So we sourced the materials, and then we installed the trail. So with the kind of footprint element, there are probably many different ways of doing it. You need to create some sort of durable, weatherproof wolf or deer footprints. So you could use stencils or markers or molded clay. We used cement. So we molded some cement. And then with the skeleton display, it's thinking about kind of positioning the skeleton near the end of the trail, ideally in a natural setting, adding signage or information that kind of explains, what the bones are. That's really fascinating for children, actually seeing what's inside a body. The nutrient cycling element, the health to the soil, and then the kind of why the fur is important. And for example, bird chick survival rate is higher where they can actually line their nest with fur. So just trying to find ways of telling this story as we're moving along the trail. The next thing, just touched on this really, but thinking about adding those educational elements, so interactive signs and diagrams, telling the story of the circle of life and the ecological role of these carcasses, and then thinking about how we might engage adults and children with kind of fun facts, etc. And then finally, there's kind of the sort of monitoring and maintenance element of the project. So kind of inspecting the trail regularly, checking the skeleton, and particularly restocking the fur feeders if during the springtime in particular they do tend to get used really, really rapidly by local bird populations. And I would say in terms of sort of maintenance, it's worth thinking about how much that even matters. So in our project, we actually made the decision that it wasn't very important to us how long the trail lasted for. We had an idea that people would probably dig up the footprints of the deer and the wolves, which they did. They didn't do it in the first week, which was a bit of a relief, but over a period of months they did. And we thought, well, to be honest, if a child goes home with a wolf footprint and puts that on their mantelpiece, have we really lost or have we won? And I think the answer is we won. So, and the skeleton, which we had a deer skeleton in concrete, that has actually still lasted. But kids did try to sort of pull the antlers off, which they managed to do. But the skull and the some of the rib cage bones are still there. So thinking about that and whether you even worry about it and how permanent you want the feature to be, I think is all part of the kind of planning for the project. So that's that project, and I'll stop sharing briefly and just see what this one's slightly more controversial perhaps, so it would be good to get anybody's thoughts and feedback. Any thoughts? Anybody think they might try and have a go at this one? There's a few unsure folks. Sounds great, Rachel says. Well, that's good. How did we evaluate it at the end? And did we get local schools involved? Helen?
Well, the answer is it hasn't ended. So I think we're going to be doing a lot more of this. I mean, we haven't evaluated this element of it formally, really, to be honest. I think the learning was mainly our learning in terms of sort of where we put it, how we promoted it, and also the sort of educational messages that went alongside it. I think if we were to do it again, we would probably try and make them more visual. You know, I think some of our stuff was a little bit wordy, and also potentially extend the way that we bring this thing to life, you know. So some experiments that Dylan and I did, actually it was probably 4 or 5 years ago, look, when we first started looking at this, we were working with a group from Brighton who were in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction, and we went through, you know, some of these processes, and we created a wolf trail and included recordings of wolves howling. I think that was a really brilliant way of bringing it to life. You know, it was so unexpected. And the other thing that we were talking about the other day, and this is really quite random, was we were talking about biofencing, you know, and how you can direct people through a site using, you know, either natural barriers or things that attract them or that repel them. And we were thinking, well, maybe we should see if we can find something that, you know, creates the aroma of rotting meat, you know, and how would that affect the site? You know, how would that affect people's experience as they move through the site? Because the thing that is so powerful about this is that it just ignites people's imaginations, you know, in such brilliant ways, you know. So the group from Brighton that we were working with, for example, they were very, it was a very, very urban group, you know, and they got completely absorbed in it, didn't they, Dylan? You know,
really did.
So I think, you know, we're still really learning about different things that we can do and different approaches that we can take.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, and I think we could probably think more about the permanency as well. For example, it would have been quite easy for us to have created footprints which were cemented to a slab of concrete, for example, or like a slab that you would see, and a pavement slab, and that slab would disappear because it would be underground, but it would be almost impossible for people to take that away. So it wouldn't be difficult to sort of think about how it's to make something look natural but also have some permanency so that your trail could last longer. But this is all about the kind of experimentation really that we would welcome feedback on. Okay, one last question if we have one, or maybe we're good. We'll move on because we have 20 minutes left, and it would be really good to get through this third project and talk about it. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so the third project is called Reimagining Dogs as Wolves to Revive Nature Reserves or Other Wild Spaces. Now, this project is completely fictional in that we haven't tested it at all. It's a concept, really, but I think it's a concept that's really worth us exploring. So the concept is really about the impact that wolves have, not just because they directly hunt and kill prey, but because they actually influence the movements of prey. And this is a phenomenon which research has been talking about since the 1990s. It's actually controversial. Not everybody believes that this is what's happening in ecosystems, but it's called the ecology of fear. And the idea is that, well, it's basically a conceptual framework and describes a kind of psychological impact that wolves or other predators have when they kind of put an induced stress on other animals. So in Yellowstone National Park, for example, which is the kind of famous case study, wolves had a big impact on the distribution of elk. And as a result, we saw a rapid regeneration of aspen woodland. Not all scientists believe that wolves were the reason for that, but it's, that's kind of the general theory. And there have been other theories to kind of support it since. So what is the result of that? So the wolves are therefore engineering the landscape simply by moving around, by hunting prey, not necessarily always killing prey. Prey then feel nervous about being in certain places where they're at higher risk of being hunted. For example, like riparian areas where they're down near a water source, but there's a lot of thick, dense vegetation. They feel more vulnerable, so they don't spend as much time in those spaces. And the result is a sort of more heterogeneous ecosystem. There's more variety, there's more opportunities for plants to regenerate in certain areas as this constant moving dynamic of predator and prey kind of plays itself out. So the challenge that we have, therefore, is could thoughtful dog management enhance biodiversity in some way by mimicking wolf behavior, creating these sort of dynamic predatory impacts that vary by season and also by location through this concept of the ecology of fear. So the first question to ask is, can we actually compare dog and wolf behavior? There are some key differences. So first of all, wolves, they play a critical ecological role as keystone species. They maintain balance by controlling prey populations, and their presence influences the abundance and distribution of smaller predators, scavengers, herbivores, and the vegetation that the herbivores feed upon in the ways that we've just discussed. Dogs, as domesticated animals, lack that ecological niche that wolves have. Their interactions are often disruptive rather than integrative, displacing wildlife without contributing to population regulation or biodiversity. However, given that this displacement also mimics wolf activity, there may be ecological benefits to managing it. And there is very little research on both dog impacts to nature and this concept. So there is some though. So here's some of the kind of current research highlights of dog impacts. So wildlife avoidance. Wildlife, including deer, birds, and small mammals, have all been studied, avoid areas near dogs, even up to 100 meters from trails. Bird diversity, not much on this, but a 2007 study in Australia showed a 35% reduction in the bird species and a 41% reduction in abundance in areas with frequent dog activity. So that's pretty massive. Trail usage. Most dogs stay on trails, but off-leash or unregulated activity intensifies ecological disruptions. And then management works. There's lots of research to show that management does have a positive effect. So leash laws, very common in the US and Canada, for example, dog-free zones and seasonal adjustments significantly reduce wildlife stress and support biodiversity. So there's some information. This information I think is useful when we think about our management approach to dogs. So let's imagine, and we were trying to sort of review and take a new management approach on a small nature reserve or a wildlife park of some description which has heavy dog usage. First thing to do would be to understand kind of local wildlife and also the visitor needs. So map sensitive areas, identify nesting, feeding and resting zones for wildlife. Secondly, assess the dog walking patterns, so noting trails, off-leash areas, high-use locations and times. And camera traps could be a very cost-effective method for doing this assessment. Then also thinking about kind of seasonal variations, so be it in both dog walk use, but also how wildlife activity changes throughout the year. The second thing is to think about designating zones for dogs and also zones for wildlife. So really having a think about where are our dog-friendly areas. So focusing on off-leash zones that are in low-impact spaces for wildlife, considering how dogs active in these zones could actually benefit wildlife. So we've talked about the dog reseeding project, but are there other ways in which we can kind of like super positively charge these wildlife locations as where dogs are having a positive impact? For example, dog paws could carry invertebrates from a series of pools, ephemeral pools in an area. Though we have to think about challenges like flea treatments, pesticides and invasive species. But, we can think about how the dogs might actually have a positive impact. Thinking about wildlife refuges. So where are the areas that we would actually need to prohibit or severely limit dog activity, especially during key times, such as, for example, breeding seasons or migration seasons? And then finally, kind of buffer zones. So based on that research, can we create 100-meter buffer zones from between trails and that critical habitat? The next thing to think about is kind of enforcing or encouraging leash laws and compliance. So big education job to do here, sharing the ecological benefits of leash laws through signage, events or social media, and then encouraging responsible behavior. So could we use rewards, recognition or partnerships with local dog groups to promote compliance? And then really thinking about visibility. So installing kind of clear, attractive signage and providing trail maps that highlight these dog-friendly zones. So we're kind of encouraging people into the spaces that we want them to use and take advantage of, which hopefully gives wildlife some relief. We can also think about kind of like habitat resilience. So what are the sort of natural deterrents that we could use? So planting dense vegetation, for example, and placing barriers around sensitive areas to limit access. The more we use nature to do that, the less people feel offended by it, seems to be the rule of thumb. And then also just thinking about like, how do we actually take the opposite approach and turn parts of our reserve into the most kind of dog-friendly and exciting places for dog walkers to go? Dog-friendly trails, spaces where they can actually throw sticks and maybe let the dogs off leash. And we're happy and comfortable with that. And it takes them away from those kind of sensitive areas. And then kind of monitoring and adapting management plans. So using technology, deploying trail cameras, for example, to monitor dog activity, we've already discussed. Tracking compliance, so observing sort of leash law adherence and adjusting enforcement strategies, what works and what doesn't work. Regularly assessing changes in wildlife abundance and diversity. And then kind of feedback loop. So, encouraging park users to share input on the zoning systems. What are they enjoying? Are they getting more out of the experience? That should be the objective. Is it working for them? And is it also working for wildlife? And then kind of refining the plan and updating it, adjusting it so that it's really is beneficial for all. So a couple of kind of examples of how that might work, kind of some case study examples. One might be that during this kind of spring nesting season, we restrict dog access to woodland nesting areas, but we encourage dogs into open meadows and degraded areas. So, for example, we can involve dog owners on our seed dispersal project in those open areas during the spring to encourage them into those spaces. In summer, we allow a sort of broader access with well-marked sensitive zones. And then in autumn, we guide dogs away from berry-rich areas critical for wildlife and migratory bird feeding. So we're kind of really sort of thinking about the seasonality. Or we don't do any of that, but in case study 2, we really just focus on how do we make the popular areas of a reserve so interesting and exciting for dog walkers. Actually, by taking that approach, they're spending most of their time in those areas. So redesigning those open areas or those off-leash spots, or making trails really interesting for dog walkers so that they focus in those areas, and it just pulls them away from the sensitive zones in a positive way without us having to shake our fingers at anybody. Why does this work? Well, we don't know if it works. It's just theoretical, which is why it would be great to get your feedback. But in principle, I think it could work. It should work. We should be able to see more thriving wildlife as a result. The clear boundaries, reducing stress and preserving critical habitats. But also, our objective should be, how can we make these spaces more engaging for the people and their dogs that also need to be able to use these spaces for their own welfare. And if we can try and strike that balance, then hopefully we achieve this kind of coexistence and this harmony between conservation and recreation and a vibrant urban space. And I think the challenge for us here is it possible for a nature reserve that has dogs and dog walkers to achieve a higher level of biodiversity than one that doesn't? Is it? I'm sure it's possible. Can we make a management plan that it means that we don't want to lose our dog walkers, because they're having, whilst there are potential negative impacts and challenges, they're overridden by the positive impact that they're having on the nature reserve. That's the challenge, and I think we have to be imaginative about how we achieve that, but it would be great to explore those opportunities. So that's the last of the 3 projects. Before we go to the last Q&A session, just a reminder that we have these 2 sessions coming up. The next one is the 12th of February at the same time. It's how to rewild like a beaver. And then on the 26th of February, at 3 o'clock also GMT, we will be talking about how to rewild like a wild boar. Please do get involved in those. We've also set up a community rewilding WhatsApp group, which we'd love you to be involved in if you're interested. We'll share the details of all of these things after this webinar. And we've also put together 3 community rewilding help sheets, which will be freely available after this webinar, and we'll send you the link. You can go to those and you can download them as PDFs. I hope that's been of some help. Let me stop sharing the video. As I say, that last project is just a concept. We haven't tested any of it, but love to get your thoughts and feedback. It's a really tough issue to get to grips with. But yeah, welcoming any comments. Anybody have any thoughts or concerns, worries, or other ideas?
I would say that I really like the idea of dog walkers and visitors to, the nature reserve, green spaces generally, just becoming more familiar with the ecology of fear. If you think about other phrases that we're now so familiar with, air miles, that was something that everyone now knows what you mean when you say air miles. I think it would be brilliant if the ecology of fear was also something that was so widely understood, because it would just make communication with dog walkers easier.
Agreed, Helen. That has been a key element of all of these projects, hasn't it, really? An opportunity to sort of try to encourage a deeper connection and understanding. And that, for me, comes from the practical, the doing. You can't beat that as a learning exercise, actually getting hands-on and doing things and learning whilst you're doing. And I think that's something that we've had great feedback on. Jo.
Hi. Yeah, I think as well with dog walkers and just people in general, is the more they learn. So, I mean, you don't want to have too many signs and things, but on the other hand, if it's good information that helps people understand why they shouldn't go in a certain area or whatever else, it really gets through to people, and they do, you know, they're helpful about it because they can see the reason why. I think most of the time when people are, you know, seen as maybe a bit ignorant or whatever, it's just because they just don't realize, you know, it's like all the flea stuff, isn't it? We've all been sort of a bit hoodwinked by the vets for many years on, you must de-flea your dog every month and you must use these chemicals and it'd be great because you won't have any fleas in your home. But now we're finding out that we're just poisoning the rivers and the fish and everything, you know. So it's all about education, I think.
Thanks, Jo. I really agree with that. And I think, you know, the onus is on us, really, you know, the people who work in nature conservation and the educators to find those ways. And negative approaches with dog walkers are really badly received, I think. So, which is understandable. So finding kind of positive ways and not kind of just saying no. You can't access this space. There will always be rule breakers. I think is probably the best way for us to move forward. But I think we need to test some of these ideas for sure.
I think it also works with teenagers and things that I know we've had people in our area where we're rewilding and stuff, and they're, oh my gosh, we can't have permissive paths through. All the kids will come in and they'll just have parties and leave cans and things like that. And it's like, yeah, if they do, I don't mind cleaning it up because, you know, I was an ignorant teenager once. You know, we've all got to get there, haven't we? We've all got to learn. So, yeah.
That's great. Yeah. I'm glad you're prepared to do that, Jo. We appreciate that. Any other questions or anything in the chat, Helen? We've probably got time for one or two more because we're coming up to the hour.
Yeah, there's a few great things in the chat. Sarah Chapman has said on dog-friendly trails, how about dog ramps and platforms for jumping constructed on bug hotels for insects? You know, so it's that idea of like almost a sort of green gym or agility thing for dogs.
Brilliant.
And then there was another chat a little bit earlier on where Louise was explaining about the sky tables that she has been involved with making. This is going back to the idea of, you know, carcasses. Of making, which basically they're platforms 2 to 5 foot off the ground, and you put roadkill on them and you can watch the animals decompose along with seeing what wildlife feeds on them, potentially using a webcam. And then further down, they also talked about a sky table underground, which she hadn't tried yet, but it sounds really intriguing. Dig a hole, put something like a dog or wire cage down into it, pop in roadkill and watch insects draw the animal back down into the earth. So I don't know if Louise is here and wants to say any more about it. It all just sounds absolutely brilliant.
Yes.
Nothing more to add really. So yeah, the sky tables were absolutely brilliant. So I made them. I was on a rewilding course a couple of years ago, and we spent a weekend a day making them, and they were incredible. And we popped or somebody popped roadkill onto them. I think we had a deer, a rabbit. What was interesting though, the birds of prey didn't actually come down, but the decomposition and all of the insects basically took advantage of it. It was just amazing. And because we were just there for a residential weekend, they put a webcam onto it so we could watch it. And then somebody came up with the idea of actually reversing that process and popping a cage into the ground, which was brilliant. It's not everybody's cup of tea. It was pretty gruesome. Videos were shared with us sort of over the course of the next few months online, but they did come with little warnings to say, before you view this video, yeah, just bear in mind that, yeah, you are going to see something which is pretty, not gruesome. It's just that we're not used to seeing these things in our landscape, are we? So it's actually got me thinking about, so I work on a nature recovery project at the National Trust, and we were out in a field this afternoon where there's no public access. And I was just thinking, yeah, next time our deer stalker comes in, I think I'm going to encourage him to leave a couple of deer in the landscape. So yeah, and we'll just, yeah, we'll see what happens. So yes, if anybody does the upside down sky table, I'd be absolutely intrigued. I'm just trying to see if I can find some photographs as well of the sky table. I'll put them onto the chat. Yeah, when I can find them. So yeah, but yeah, if anybody else does it, let me know. So
that's brilliant, Louise. I love that idea, and if you can share anything, that would be fabulous. We're just about up on time, but Nick, let's take your question and then we'll close out. Nick. Hi.
Hi. Sorry, I was just going to very quickly add on to that at Belmont we have fields that are not open to the public, and we quite often leave a deer carcass there and then take our groups of children through to witness it and see what happens in the decomposition. And our pigs get in and eat some of it as well most of the time. And it is a really fascinating learning resource. Everybody absolutely loves it. It's quite gruesome. They don't have to look at it if they don't want to, but we find it to be hugely popular and actually really, really positive. Just want to share.
That's wonderful. So what kind of reactions do you get from the children?
Oh, can we pick it with a stick? Are we allowed to pick it up? Can we kick it? And then we always put it back to them, and then they have these like really in-depth meaning of life discussions about and they always decide that they're going to respect it and not touch it and just look at it pretty much every time. Yeah.
That's really cool that the kind of the respect word comes out of something.
Yeah. It's all child-led where we are, so we don't we let them decide. But yeah,
wonderful, brilliant. Well, sky tables and carcasses underground and underground cameras and the gruesomeness that children love, and I quite like as well, is a wonderful way to finish this session. Thank you so much to everybody for taking part. We will do let us know. Just a reminder that this session was recorded, so if anyone does have a problem with that, please do let us know. We'll put the recording out tomorrow, so drop us a message between now and then if you can. Otherwise we'll send that out. We'll share the recording so that you can share it and use it. We'll share the activity sheets with you as well, but we'd love to hear about other ideas, and hopefully we can collectively make more of these activity sheets and get more people involved. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you to the Ouse Valley Climate Action team as well for funding this webinar. I hope to see many of you on the next one, and have a great afternoon. Thank you to Helen too. Thanks, Helen.
And thanks to you, Dylan.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Dylan. Thank you both. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.